Imagine this. From one day to the next, your family members literally just stop speaking to you. You're walking down the street, and lifelong friends actually avert their eyes. The community that built every single layer of your identity, the language you use, your calendar, your deeply held understanding of right and wrong, just slams its doors in your face. You are, in every practical and emotional sense, completely cast out. It's not just an administrative slap on the wrist or a simple disagreement over beliefs. It's a social death. But if we step back and look at the deep architecture of history, we uncover this absolutely startling truth. This kind of devastation, it's rarely the end of the line. In fact, it is almost always the beginning.
Because this very modern, agonizing pain of isolation actually belongs to a much larger, incredibly ancient story. You know the saying, every prophet was rejected in his own hometown. Every sage was first cast out before he was called holy. If you've ever experienced this kind of shattering expulsion, you haven't fallen out of the story. You've actually just been placed squarely into the longest, most distinguished lineage in human spiritual history. What happened to you has happened before, to literally the most pivotal, transformative human beings who ever walked this earth. And for them, being kicked out wasn't a failure. It was the absolute prerequisite for their ultimate destiny.
We're talking about a universal archetype here, the chosen outcast. Across the entire span of human history, this one sacred pattern repeats itself with unmistakable, almost eerie consistency. The people who eventually reshape our spiritual understanding are always expelled from the religious structures of their time first. The prophet is rejected by the priests, the mystic gets condemned by the institution, the reformer is driven straight into the wilderness. It's like a sacred initiatory design woven into the very fabric of spiritual greatness. The chosen ones are always expelled first.
Just look at the staggering breadth of this across millennia. Go back to the 13th century BCE. Moses is exiled from Egypt, rejected by his own people, and has to flee into the desolate wilderness of Midian, long before he ever sees a burning bush. Jump to the 5th century BCE. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, has to completely expel himself from the palace, shedding his entire royal identity just to seek enlightenment. Fast forward to 30 CE. Jesus of Nazareth is explicitly condemned by the Sanhedrin, the supreme religious council of his own tradition, and executed as a religious criminal. And in 622 CE, the Prophet Muhammad is driven out of Mecca under the threat of death by his very own tribe. Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam. The bedrock of world religion was quite literally forged by outcasts.
So why does it have to happen this way? Well, we have to look at the geography of transformation. Inside the walls, you have the realm of orthodoxy, comfort, and the status quo. It's safe, sure, but it is fundamentally bounded. Outside those walls lies the wilderness. Think about the prophet Elijah. After this massive, spectacular victory, he ends up fleeing in absolute terror into the desert, suicidal and totally alone. But it was out there, at Mount Horeb, completely stripped of all institutional support, that he finally encountered the divine and a still, small voice, this profound sound of sheer silence. The wilderness isn't a punishment, it's a necessary spiritual curriculum. You simply cannot hear that sheer silence over the deafening noise inside the walls.
And this process actually operates like a universal four-stage machine of rejection. Stage 1, formation within a religious structure. You learn the rules. Stage 2, conflict. You have an encounter with reality or with the sacred that just exceeds those authorized frameworks. Stage 3 is expulsion. The institution feels deeply threatened, so it expels or condemns the figure. And finally, stage 4, transformation. It's in the barren, empty space created by that exile where the figure's most significant, world-changing work actually happens. The truly fascinating part? The institutions doing the expelling rarely view themselves as the villains. They genuinely believe they're protecting orthodoxy and purity. They unwittingly play the antagonist in this ancient script without even realizing they're reading from it.
Psychologically speaking, the shattering is an absolute necessity. It's called ego dissolution. See, every institution confers identity. It tells you exactly who you are, what you're supposed to believe, and who belongs in your community. Expulsion violently strips every bit of that away. It is a profound, agonizing death of that false, institutionally conferred self. But this painful stripping away is the fundamental prerequisite for the emergence of your true self. When your inner certainty is no longer dependent on everybody around you validating it, your genuine spiritual conviction is finally authenticated. The fire burns away the dross, and it leaves behind only what is unmistakably real. And history gives us rapid-fire evidence of this dynamic, showing us exactly how institutions function to preserve themselves by erasing transformative voices. Socrates questioning the religious certainties of Athens, he was executed for impiety.
Paul of Tarsus, who was once an institutional enforcer himself, experiences this radical conversion and spends the rest of his life being beaten and imprisoned by religious communities who just couldn't handle his message. Mary Magdalene, the very first witness to the central mystery of the Christian faith, was institutionally erased and marginalized for over 1,000 years. Galileo proved the Earth orbited the sun and got slapped with house arrest for the rest of his life by the Inquisition. Time and time again, truth is consistently treated as treason by the institutions it challenges.
Which brings us to the core theology of expulsion. At its foundation, every religious or social institution is essentially a container. It's designed to hold and protect a very specific set of truths. But containers are rigid. They are completely limited by their shape. So, when a person's spiritual reality, their vision, or their integrity grows larger than the institutional vessel that originally formed them, expulsion isn't just likely, it is inevitable. The container cannot expand to hold what exceeds it. It can only break or it can eject. When you are cast out, it's often simply because you literally grew too large for the room you were standing in.
And please don't think this pattern is just ancient history. It operates with identical, surgical precision today. Take the year 1656. The brilliant philosopher Baruch Spinoza was hit with a cherem, a severe, absolute decree of excommunication by his community in Amsterdam. If you compare the architecture of his exile to the practices of modern high-control groups, like the disfellowshipping practice of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the parallels are stunning. The mechanism is exactly the same, a formal communal decree or public announcement. The consequence is identical, total, devastating shunning by family and peers. And the catalyst? Holding unapproved theological beliefs. The machinery of excommunication hasn't changed a bit in 400 years.
The raw power of this kind of isolation is absolute. Just think about this number, 23. That was Spinoza's age when he was excommunicated. At just 23 years old, he was completely and utterly isolated. His family shunned him. His community severed every single tie. He had to live in poverty, grinding glass lenses just to survive. Yet he used that expelled, silent solitude to write Ethics, a masterpiece that profoundly influenced the Enlightenment, modern democracy, and frankly, the entire trajectory of Western liberal thought. The isolation was total, yes, but from that outcast position, a 23-year-old completely changed the intellectual history of the world.
This breaking down of a person isn't just a political or philosophical phenomenon either. It is recognized as a deeply spiritual event by cultures all across the globe. In indigenous traditions spanning Siberia, the Americas, and Africa, there's this concept known as shamanic sickness. It's an initiatory crisis that involves severe isolation, illness, and the complete shattering of a person's normal social existence. Now, to the community, it just looks like madness or a tragic fall from grace, but the tradition understands this as a direct, undeniable divine calling. The spirits are dismantling the individual to remake them into someone capable of bridging worlds. The shaman is made by being broken. The shattering of normal life is the initiation.
So, for those of you who have been cast out, erased, or shunned by the community you loved, you didn't ask for this. You didn't go looking for expulsion, and the loss of those relationships is a genuine bleeding wound that deserves to be fully grieved. But when that grieving finally finds its rhythm, there is something absolutely vital you need to see. You've been placed, by circumstances you didn't even choose, outside the walls. But outside the walls is where the burning bush is. It's where the Bodhi tree grows. It is where the greatest works of philosophy and spirit are actually forged. You are now standing in the most distinguished lineage in human spiritual history.
There's an ancient verse that says, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." The institution that expelled you made a very grave miscalculation. They assumed that their walls were the ultimate boundary of the sacred, and that by removing you from their ranks, they were somehow removing you from your future. But history proves them wrong every single time. The greatest figures were always expelled first. The institution that cast you out simply doesn't have the power to write the end of your story. The wilderness is real, and the wilderness is incredibly tough, but it has always been a school. So the only real question left is this: what will you build with the stone they threw away?